Politics. Component 1, Part 1, UK Politics. Chapter 1, Democracy and Participation. Current systems of representative and direct democracy. Direct democracy would be a referendum. Representative democracy, an example of that would be Parliament. Is there a crisis of participation in the UK? Yes. There's apathy and hapathy, in which people are apathetic to voting because they are enjoying the political climate. No. There was an e-petition in 2007 for road charging that got 1.8 million signatures. The Scottish 2014 turnout for the referendum vote was 84.6%, and there has been massive increased membership of pressure groups. What potential changes could be made to fix the crisis of participation? 1. Election days changed from Thursdays to weekends. 2. Allow people to vote anywhere in their constituency. 3. Allowing voting to take place over several days, as opposed to just on a Thursday. The case for reform of the UK democratic system. The no argument. There are already devolved governments. There's already independent funding. There's already a free media. There's already free and fair elections. There's already a wide range of political parties and pressure groups. The yes argument for the case of reform of the UK democratic system. Under representative democracy, the minority viewpoints are overlooked. House of Lords lacks democratic legitimacy. There's a lack of protection for citizens' rights because the Human Rights Act is only partial, and control of the media is mostly owned by unaccountable business interests. The argument for making voting compulsory. Yes, voting is a social duty as well as a right. Yes, more representative parliament. Yes, government would need to keep whole electorate in mind. Yes, spoiling ballot is still an option. The no argument. Making voting compulsory could create a presidential voting system in which an unwanted middle ground is elected. It would not stop the neglection of safe seats, and it does not address the deeper reasons why people choose to not vote. You could also argue that making voting compulsory is undemocratic. Okay, let's move on to pressure groups. The types of pressure group include sectional (interest groups), who are trade unions, such as the Law Society, which is open to solicitors in England and Wales. Cause groups, aka promotional groups, who choose to draw attention to an issue or a group, such as Greenpeace, and it has mostly open membership. There are social movements, which are more specific. They're similar to cause, but they're a lot more loosely structured. For example, Camps for Climate Action that was held between 2006 and 2010 against Heathrow expansion, or the Occupy Wall Street movement. And there's insider and outsider movement. Outsider groups are in need of publicity to get traction within government and authority, whereas insider groups are in close contact with the government and civil service, and unlike outsider groups, are consulted. Other influences similar to pressure groups include lobbyists. Each year, £2 billion is spent on the lobbyist industry each year. Corporations, which are like lobbyists, but more interested in corporate gains. They support and maintain the revolving door process, in which MPs will fulfill their lobbying criteria, and then once their term is over or whatever and they leave their seat, they will have a job waiting for them through the revolving door process. There's think tanks, which are a body of experts who put forward suggestions or find figures that support causes pushed by MPs, such as the Adam Smith Institute, which is a right-wing one, and the Fabian Society, which is a left-wing one. Pressure groups and other influences, what are their reasons for success? There's 4 main reasons. These include the resources, the tactics and leadership, the amount of public support they have, and the government attitude towards the group. Okay. A wider franchise and debates over suffrage. This is the 3rd subsection. The Great Reform Act. This abolished rotten boroughs and created urban seats such as Greater Manchester and Manchester City. Which led to more votes in the middle class. Tenant farmers and small property owners became allowed to vote. Moving on from 1867, the Great Reform Act, you have 1884, where rural householders put some footing on... 1884, rural householders were put on the same footing as borough ones, which meant that 25% of the population was in the franchise. Then you had, obviously, 1918, Representation of the People Act, in which all men over 21 and all women over 30, so 75% of the population got the vote. Then, obviously, again, there was 1928, Representation of the People Act, in which men and women at 21 were allowed the vote. And then there was 1948, there was a one-person vote, so plural voting was removed, in which you can go and vote in multiple constituencies that you have properties in. And in 1969, 18-year-olds were allowed to vote. Let's do votes at 16. Arguments for and against. Arguments for. They already have a plethora of other voting rights. Citizenship lessons in school help to inform us. Whereas no, we have a lack of life experience. Young people already vote the least, so it wouldn't really make that much difference. Usually it's less than 30% of 18 to 20-year-olds vote. And it would be a risk that hasn't been experimented with globally, which is a good argument. Although it was put forward in the Scottish referendum that 16-year-olds were allowed to vote, and there was a high turnout in that age group. Under a wider franchise and debates over suffrage, under that you have work of suffragettes and suffragists. That aforementioned 1918 Representation of the People Act was largely in part due to the work of suffragettes, suffragists, and just the change in times, really, with women kind of proving their salt in the wars. The NUWSS was founded in 1897 by Millicent Fawcett, which was a non-violent middle-class white suffragist movement, whereas the WSPU was formed by Emmeline Pankhurst in 1903. These were suffragettes, not suffragists, suffragettes, which was working and middle class. Both of these groups suspended their campaigning in World War I for 1914, and suffragettes went on hunger strikes. In 1913, suffragette Emily Davison died at Epsom, Derby, when she threw herself under the King's horse. And the fourth component of this is rights in context. Yeah, this is quite a thin one. There's arguments for parliamentary sovereignty versus the rights of the people. So Parliament is supposed to have the vast majority of sovereignty, but on the other hand, people are also supposed to be able to retain their rights. An example of this is when it came into question, it was the people's right to roam versus Madonna's right to own land in 2004, somewhere down in South England, in a big estate, and people were roaming around because it's the Right to Roam Act, isn't it? And then terror attacks allow governments to reduce sovereign rights, which are arguments for and against. Okay, and there's also the four major milestones of rights in the UK have been the 2010 Equality Act. I'll do it backwards. 2010 Equality Act, the Human Rights Act in 1998, which made the European Convention on Human Rights, the 1950 Act, part of British law, as in preparation for putting in the Supreme Court, and then, which is the third point, and then the fourth point is obviously the 1215 Magna Carta. This has been Chapter 1, Democracy and Participation. Thank you very much. Hello, this is Politics, Component 1, Part 1, UK Politics, Chapter 2, Political Parties. This is a bit more information than Democracy and Participation, but I've streamlined it down a bit. The general outline of it, I would say, is split into two features. There's functions and features, and funding. So we'll go through the functions and features of political parties first. First we have, they provide government, they formulate policy within their manifesto, they recruit office holders, which is a small percentage of the party's membership, which is recruited for office. They help to represent the people, and represent different ideas that these people may hold, and they encourage participation. And a good example of this can be seen in the Labour £3 membership kind of deal in 2015. And then, all right, so the second half of the outline is in funding. Okay, MPs are paid for from tax. They are allowed to claim expenses on the cost of running an office, having two homes, having for example, house in the constituency, house in the London area for Westminster. And then they can also claim expenses for travel, including first-class travel. Political parties raise money from membership and subscriptions. These can be in fundraising events, but this arguably can lead to corruption. But in 2000, there was the 2000 Political Parties Elections and Referendum Act, in which there was in which there was the creation of an independent commission into spending, and parties were only allowed £30,000 to spend on election campaigns per constituency. The other way that parties can raise funding is through trade unions. In 2016, there was the Trade Union Act, which means people had to opt in to making payments towards don't even know what that word is. Payments towards the political party, maybe. Who knows? Okay, under funding we have the arguments for and against state funding. 4. It's an important role in representative democracy, so it's kind of needed. 2, it would reduce the disparity in party funding, making elections more fair. 3, if the state matched the public donations, this would encourage recruitment into parties, so people would be more likely to, donate to parties and get involved. And it would also curb private influences. The arguments against. Number 1, calls for greater state intervention have the ability to restrict radical parties, which is a good, could be argued to be a good argument, but for the sake of generality, I'll put it under against. It's hard to decide, number 2, it's hard to decide how much support a party should have for funding, so different levels of spending would kind of just mess the entire system up. 3, it would don't even know what that says. Oh, I don't know, it's it would exclude parties from the wishes of their backers, because it's more about the state at this stage, so everyone would become moderate. Taxpayers would resent contributions to parties they disapprove, so I think it would just eventually get overturned. So that's the general outline of political parties. Let's move on to emerging minor parties. That's a quick one. The main emerging group is the SNP, although you could argue that they've already emerged. They were founded in 1943. They're centre-left wing currently. They have 56. They had 56 of 59 Scottish seats in 2015, although I think this has gone down by 5 within the last 4 years. 4 years, yeah. For the 2019 election. The SNP led to the 2012 Scotland Act, in which Scotland received further devolutionary powers. Not sure that's a word. And they also led to the 2014 referendum. Now onto the minor parties. There's Green and UKIP. Green is more left-wing. Obviously, they want to fight social inequality and solve environmental issues, whereas UKIP wants to restrict immigration, is a right-wing party, supports grammar schools, wants to leave the EU. Funnily enough, both of these want to legalise weed, which is, I thought would have been quite unusual for UKIP. Although UKIP's kind of evolved, it's deflated and then evolved into the Brexit Party, which only has had real success in the, ironically, European elections. The importance of emerging and minor political parties. Minor parties draw national attention to specific issues that may have been overlooked by larger parties, such as the environment or wanting to leave the EU. They provide national knowledge for regional ideas that may have been underfunded and overlooked. So you could say SNP. In Wales you have Plaid Cymru, although they don't really have the same, nowhere near the same level of success as the SNP. And once again they help present and preserve smaller regional cultures. So that's definitely the role of Plaid Cymru. The kind of third heading we'll do is UK political parties in context. So there's two headings under this: the development of a multi-party system and factors affecting party success. Let's do factors affecting party success first, because that's relatively straightforward. Number one, the strength of the party's leadership. So this is controversial, but Keir Starmer, in my opinion, is better than Jeremy Corbyn in that his leadership is much more moderate and he's able to maintain the ship. Same can be said for Boris Johnson, although Boris Johnson pre-COVID, as opposed to Theresa May, who was just kind of all over the place, she wasn't able to, keep the factions down, which brings us on to the second point. The extent to which the parties are united between factions. So, you would have the recent, I think a couple months ago, there was the One Nation Conservatives as a organisation within the Conservative Party was restarted, not just as an ideology. And then you got like the Brexiteers and that. Whereas you would have Blairites and, Momentum fans and moderates and trade union members in Labour. And then the role of media, number three, the role of media in portraying a particular image, which is often, in my opinion, why parties are able to win sometimes. The second heading is development of a multi-party system. So you could say within Westminster, this is not the case. It's remained fairly two-party structure. And in 1974, 98% of seats were between Labour and Conservative, which is largely due in part to the first-past-the-post system. But regardless, later coalitions, such as the 2010 to 2015 one, could be used to describe it as a 2.5-party system. In the devolved bodies, so Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and I guess you could say like London Assembly and like other regional assemblies, you could say the use of AMS in Scottish, so additional member system, as a voting system in Scottish and Welsh assemblies has meant that there is more proportionality in these systems and a wider variety of party representation. Yet single ones are still able to dominate. So yeah, despite the introduction of additional member system, the SNP still has massive following. A better example of this would be in Northern Ireland, where there's a fair mix, and I think there's only one more. There is only one more seat that the DUP have. So the DUP have like 28 seats, and then Sinn Féin have 27, which is a very close draw. Single transferable vote in Northern Ireland means there is far wider array of parties represented in society. Now, here we're getting onto the big heading, which is the established political parties. First, we'll do Conservatives. I split them into like different categories. So the first one is traditional conservatism, which is a lot older, and it was largely at the time supported in the 17th century by the middle class and the aristocracy. It was largely focused on property rights. One of their big prime ministers was Robert Peel, who was against revolution, following the French Revolution and general unsettled European politics at the time. Don't even know what that says. Oh yeah, sorry. their main goal was to conserve established societal institutions, which is like the whole thing about conservatives. Moving on from that, we have one nation conservatism, which, although is just an ideology, like I said a couple minutes ago, it is also been recently rebranded as an organisation within the Conservative Party, possibly going to be used by people like Sajid Javid to oppose Bojo's reign. Parts of this is paternalistic, so as a slightly left-wing policy than traditional conservatism. It's more 19th century rather than 17th and early 18th. The main guy for this was Benjamin Disraeli, who wrote his book Sybil, in which he introduced the entire idea of one nation conservatism. They want to impose a patriotic foreign policy, and they want to strengthen national unity by doing this. So, through foreign policy, they want to, it could be argued that this method would neglect domestic policy, but their argument is that sorry if I've been scraping the mic around, but by strengthening foreign policy, you'll strengthen national unity. They're pragmatic, which means that they're non-ideological. They think it's all a waste of time, and they think that the natural leaders of the aristocracy and that need to accept their obligation to act benevolently to the disadvantaged. On the other hand, the next group we have is Thatcherism plus the New Right, which both believe that individuals should be greater than the state, so they want reduced welfare, especially Thatcherism, reduced welfare and free market economics. They support traditional values, and they are very intolerant to alternative lifestyles. This is the textbook, not me, although I think it's true as well. And then they have, within the New Right, they have ideas of neoliberalism and neoconservatism. So, despite appearing very far right, I don't know, it's actually, a bit of a ploy, really, if it's got neoliberalism wrapped into it. Then we have modern conservatism. Currently we have Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak is currently loved by business and could be one of the next potential political leaders. Basically everyone who's in a position of power and then is asked whether or not they want to be PM, and who says no, I don't want to do that, will eventually, get rolled out into rotation. So I reckon, I might be totally wrong, but I reckon Rishi Sunak will eventually become, he's like the modern Lloyd George in that he's been given a job in which, it's impossible to mess it up at this stage. So he's just been given a job in which Sajid Javid has stepped down, making Sajid Javid look like a traitor, and Rishi look like the brilliant mastermind who's helping out business. So Sajid Javid stepped down as Chancellor of the Exchequer, undermining Boris Johnson, who wanted him to fire all his civil servants and kind of join the monetary, I don't even know what it's called, the monetary, the Exchequer buildings, and put it right next to number 10, for whatever reason, to have a more streamlined, business-focused government. And they currently have a landslide majority post the 2019 election. The modern Conservatives are more neoliberal and more neoconservative, and a tiny bit One Nation than traditional Thatcherism, I would say, especially under coronavirus. For the next established party, we have Labour Party. Firstly, we'll do Old Labour, which is social democracy. They're focused on equality, control capitalism, collectivism, reduce class divisions, and then social justice. Then we have New Labour, which is the third way, which is more focused on individualism and free market, which is kind of slightly more right-wing policies, but then again you have the left-wing policies like established welfare state, communitarianism, and social justice. Thirdly, we have the modern Labour Party. So you had Gordon Brown, who was the third way in 2008, who kind of fixed the recession, although it left a stain on his... there was no way he could have survived the recession, but he still did a great job on it. It's like coronavirus. Even if Boris Johnson was able to do a really good job, which he still hasn't done, no one wants... It's like Winston Churchill even. You don't want a leader who's associated with something like that crap. In 2010 there was Ed Miliband. Whatever, I don't even know. Then you had Miliband as the leader, not the Prime Minister, during David Cameron. And in 2010, during Gordon Brown, he was associated with the poor bounce back, which is fair enough. Yeah, he did a poor job. And he's often associated with David Miliband, who arguably could have been a much better Labour leader party. Then we had Jeremy Corbyn, who was far left, was supported by the group Momentum. He was disliked for his unrealistic manifesto, and this resulted in a massive loss in seats, like the biggest we've seen in ages. Now we have Keir Starmer, who's the current leader. He's more third way than Old Labour, and he's getting a lot of traction in PMQs and things like that, despite not having the same youth following as Jeremy Corbyn did have. Regardless, the Labour Party still has a massive youth following, but the youth don't even vote, so it's not as important as people may think. The third established party is the Liberal Party. What the hell? Brodem. I don't even know what I wrote there. Basically, it's got two temporary leaders while the ex-leader has been removed from our seat. There's two factions. That's the current, that's the modern. There's two factions. You have social liberals, who are more left-wing, like Tim Farron, the ex-leader, who was good, but then he revealed that he opposed abortion and gays, because he was Catholic, like quite strongly Catholic. Centre-left, kind of modern liberalism, social justice, higher welfare spending, and then you have the Orange Book liberals, who are more, you could even compare them to like Thatcherism and the New Right. Well, not the New Right, but Thatcherism and Thatcherism and New Labour, I would say. Yeah, you could say they want more taxes to increase... They want to cut taxes to increase opportunity. Nick Clegg was more in that type of group, so in the 2010 to 2015 coalition, which resulted in a failure on his promises and kind of killed off the Liberal Party. It's more revolved around classical liberalism and increased social mobility through increased economic freedom. It just says that. That is what they support. Alright. That is Political Parties, Chapter 2 of Component 1 of the Politics A-Level. Hello, this is Politics, Component 1, Part 1 UK Politics, Chapter 3, Electoral Systems. It's... yeah, let's do it. So the first heading we have is referendums / referenda, the plural of referendums. There are arguments for and against it. 4. They enable the electorate to decide on big constitutional issues and act as a form of entrenchment. 2. They impose a decision on a reluctant government. That could also be an against factor. 3. They can settle long-standing disputes and disagreements. 4. They help to create a more informal they help to create a more informed and educated electorate. 5. They strengthen democracy and ask the public to speak for themselves. 6. They promote participation and give everyone an equal voice. On the against side, you have they determine the authority of Parliament. They undermine the authority of Parliament, which should be sovereign. 2. Referenda can be asked more than once until the correct answer is given. 3. They can be very divisive in society. 4. Campaigns can be misleading and oversimplify complicated issues. 5. They place political decisions in the hands of those who may lack specific knowledge. 6. They can simplify and distort issues. And 7. Too regular usage can lead to what is known as voter fatigue, where if you're just in a direct democracy and you have opportunities to vote at every corner, you're just going to give up and leave it to the people who know about the issues. Then we have the different electoral systems. I'll go nice and slow through this because, in my opinion, for me especially, this is the hardest thing. Let's start with first past the post. This is how it works. In the UK there are 650 constituencies, and in order to stand, a candidate pays a deposit, which is returned if 5% of the vote is obtained. The electors then cast their vote for one candidate in a single member constituency. Each voter has one vote for a single candidate, so there's no plural voting. The winner needs to achieve a plurality of votes, the most, to be elected. So, in conclusion, 236 MPs are needed for a party to have a majority, or for there to be a coalition majority. And other important knowledge about this is that there are marginal seats in the first past the post system, which are swing seats where lots of election resources are spent. There are, under the topic of plurality electoral system, which is why it is, the candidate with the most votes is elected. It's different to having plurality seats, which is where you can go and vote in different things. A plurality electoral system is where, when you're voting within the constituency, the candidate with the most votes is elected. There are safe seats, which are seats that are unlikely to change their party vote, and it is used in Westminster's Parliament. The strengths are it produces strong and stable governments. 2, MPs have close relationships with constituents even. 3, the most preferred candidate wins the seat. 4, it's quick to get results. 5, it's simple to cast the vote. 6, it is good at keeping out extremist parties. On the weaknesses, you have it favours the two-party system. 2, votes are wasted on losing candidates. So if I was going to vote for the Green Party, it would go nowhere. My vote would just kind of disappear. 3, it is less representational than other systems. 4, most MPs do not achieve a majority vote, so are not actually that representative within their constituency. 5, electronic voting means that the ease and speed talked about in the strength is overrated because it's all done by a machine anyway, so it doesn't really matter. 6, It discriminates vastly against smaller parties. Perfect, that's first past the post. Let's move on to the supplementary vote. How it works. Voters have 2 preferential votes. So they have like two boxes that they can tick, or like fill in the names for, or like 2 people you can put like a 1 and a 2 next to. If a candidate wins more than 50% of the first votes, so the number 1 votes, they're elected straight away. But this is quite unlikely, so if no candidate does so, all but the top 2 choices are eliminated. And then the second preference candidates out of the remaining number 2 votes from the ballot papers of the eliminated votes are then counted. So all the votes that didn't initially have one of the first or second people in it, the first or second choice within it are then counted for their second vote, and if there's the first and second, it's added onto their total, and then the candidate with the most first and second votes is elected. Important facts. It's used to elect the London Mayor, various other regional mayors, and then police and crime commissioners. It's a majoritarian electoral system, which means a majority of votes must be obtained to be elected. And the strengths of it: 1, it encourages moderate campaigning, as gaining second choice votes is important. 2, it's relatively simple and easy to use. 3, could most easily replace first past the post out of all the other systems. 4, all MPs would have to support a majority of their voters, so you have to be kind of more moderate. 5, it reduces the need for tactical voting. 6, single member constituencies lead to good constituency and MP links. And its weaknesses are: 1, it promotes voting for the main 3 candidates. 2, it doesn't fully reduce the risk of tactical voting or the usage of tactical voting. 3, not all MPs secure a majority vote, as some of the second choices will be for already eliminated candidates. So it's more representative, but there's in a lot of cases it's quite similar to first past the post. That is supplementary voting. Let's do AMS, additional member system. This is how it works in Scotland. There's 129 seats in the Scottish Parliament, and it splits off into 2 sections. I'll do the first section first. The first vote is using first past the post to choose a member of the local constituency, and then the second vote is used to select a political party from the party list, and then within the party list there's members ordered by the party, and these will be top-up members, and then 56 MPs are chosen this way. Well, MSPs, so Member of Scottish Parliament, are chosen this way. And then both of these 2 votes are joined together, and it produces 2 types of representative. 1 local and 1 regional. The party list vote is used to top up the constituency vote, making the overall result more proportionate. It's used, obviously, like I said, in Scotland. It's used in the London Assembly and the Welsh Assembly too. It is a proportional electoral system, which means that there's no wasted votes, and it's more likely to produce a coalition government, although this is not the case with the SNP in Scotland. Its strengths include: it is proportional. 2, each voter has a directly accountable single constituency representative. 3, it gives voters a wider choice. 4, moderate coalition government is more likely. And its weaknesses include: 1, list members are chosen by the party and are only accountable to the party, so they're kind of rogues. 2, can create animosity between the two types of representative, so local and regional. 3, people can be confused as what to do with their votes because it's slightly more confusing. And 4, smaller parties are less well represented than under a fully proportionate system. And then the last one we have is STV, single transferable vote. How it works. This is how it works in Northern Ireland. I would say it's the most confusing one. STV uses multi-member constituencies, and voters number their choices preferentially. In order to be elected, a candidate needs to get more votes than a quota, which is decided by using the Droop formula, which is DROOP. The Droop formula is the number of votes divided by the number of seats plus 1. The surplus votes that go above the quota are proportionately redistributed to second preferences, and then if no one reaches the quota, the least popular candidate is eliminated and the second preference of those who voted for them is redistributed. And this process continues until all the seats are filled. It's used in the Northern Ireland Assembly and Scottish local council elections, and it's highly proportionate. The advantages are: 1, very little of the votes are wasted. 2, greater voter choice to choose from. 3, there's more or less no need for tactical voting. 4, it's more likely for a moderate coalition government. 5, there are no safe seats, meaning that candidates can put effort in everywhere. And then weaknesses: 1, counting results take longer. 2, this can lead to donkey voting, where voters vote according to the people that appear on the ballot. So if they appear at the top or whatever, or the first place that they look, they're more likely to get chosen. In multi-member constituencies, ballots can get big and confusing. Many ballots were spoiled in Scotland when it was introduced. And then multi-member constituencies 5 means lines of accountability for representatives are less clear. Perfect. That was STV, and that was electoral systems. This is A-Level Politics, Component 1, Part 1, UK Politics, Chapter 4, Voting Behaviour and the Media. Voting Behaviour and the Media. So let's start with class-based voting and other influences on voting patterns. These are the different factors that affect the way that the different ways that people choose to vote. There's age, region, ethnicity, gender, which are all part of the partisan voting attachment, which other factors include disillusion and apathy, partisan de-alignment, class de-alignment, and governing competency and other voter choice. That's basically it. It's all obvious stuff. Let's do the influence of the media. Alright, there's a good bit of extra knowledge. There's a website called The Canary, which is an online blog that says it's that basically pays its writers on the basis of the amount of clicks that they get. And Kerry-Ann Mendoza is the editor, who's a big fan of Jeremy Corbyn. And they have been able to pull in numbers comparable to the BBC in past times. Social media and fake news. In the UK, 28% of young people cited social media as their main news source, and then 24% of young people said that their main news source was TV. In 2015, Home Secretary Amber Rudd argued that they, being social media, needed to be treated the same way as publishing companies. Media bias. Newspapers have no Ofcom style obligation, and most national papers, except The Guardian, iNews and The Mirror, support the Conservatives. Ofcom controls and regulates kind of TV media, and they state that coverage of parties during the election period must be fair and appropriate. All discussions and analysis of referenda must finish when the polls are opened. Broadcasters must wait until polls close on polling day before they publish the result of these polls. A list of candidates must be included in any constituency discussions. Then we have, does the media create political opinion, or does it just reflect it? The arguments under create include very few people read the manifestos. 2, the public are swayed by persuasive headlines rather than policy. 3, politicians are conscious of their media image and seek to control the news agenda. 4, winning parties of 2015 and 2017 were supported by the vast majority of the press. 5, the power of the media is growing rapidly, especially online. And that's in the argument that says it reflects it rather than creates it, political opinion and the media. You say, 1, the public makes its mind up from many media sources rather than just the one. 2, the issues that dominate the campaign come from the parties rather than the media. 3, parties use media to broadcast directly to voters, uniting party and media in one, so there's little to no distinction. 4, the public tends to choose media sources which reflect their views, and it's not the other way around, which I think is the strongest argument. And then 5, many argue that the media follows and reflects the public's views rather than creating them. Yeah, basically the same thing again. Alright, then we have some case studies of different voting behaviour things. Alright, let's see. 1979, Thatcher's first victory. It was a 43-seat majority. It initiated 18 years of Conservative rule and ended in 1997. It called after James. The election itself was called after James Callaghan's minority government lost a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons. The initial majority was, in fact, modest, but it increased in 83 and 87 following the Falklands War. Then Labour descended into left/centre-left, even a little bit right infighting on policy until 1997 when they were united behind Blair. On the topic of policy and manifestos and how that affected the election, Labour and Conservative manifestos were very moderate, and they both wanted to bring inflation down. There was no notion of huge privatisation plans from Thatcher, so May just seemed uncredible when he said that what the Conservatives were planning on doing was privatising, which in the end he was right about. In the campaign, Conservatives adopted a modern advertising set of techniques from Gordon Reeve and Tim Bell, who are like their advertisement guys. And Thatcher turned down all debates, which would have highlighted her social weakness and incompetency as a speaker. So, but that was allowed back then. In the wider context of the vote, Labour was weak in size to govern. It was already a minority government. The winter of discontent had just ruined everything, because the Labour had kind of taken on the policy of appeasement with the TUC, the trade unions. They just allowed the trade unions to grow and expand, and flex their power to no real avail, resulting in the winter of discontent. And Callaghan couldn't control these trade unions. When Callaghan came back from some meeting like the Bahamas or whatever, like an international meeting in a sunny country, I think it was the Bahamas, the Sun, he basically said that there was no crisis, and the Sun, when he came back, wrote headlines saying, "Crisis? What crisis?" Which is a good piece of evidence, saying that the media won. Kind of helped that vote. 1997, Blair's New Labour victory. That's a 179 seat majority. It was a landslide which removed John Major and opened up for 13 years of Labour. Tony Blair was PM until 2007, when he was succeeded by Gordon Brown. The Liberal Democrats emerged as a significant third force in Westminster. The Conservatives were afflicted by ongoing divisions, poor leadership, and an inability to appear relevant. In terms of policy and manifestos, Blair drove the policy of modernisation, which had already started in under Kinnock and Smith. So he kind of rode off a small Conservative success and made it a lot better. Scrap that. Scrap that. No, I lied. Kinnock and Smith were Labour leaders. I know I'd fucked up there. He abandoned the full clause in nationalisation, abandoned tax increases, and also the strengthening of trade union powers. He was tougher on law and order, and open to more constitutional reform. He employed public relations experts to handle the media, and this is in the campaign, and systematically targeted marginal seats. Labour candidates were all carrying around a pledge card, which showed the modesties of the policies that Blair had suggested. So they weren't really perceived as an extreme or like reformist party anymore. In the wider context, in the 1990s recession that took place, which ruined John Major's kind of face, and then Black Wednesday in 1992 September also did the same. And then Tories had just fucked it all up by being involved in a series of financial and sexual scandals. 2010. The first post-war coalition, which was a 77-seat majority, but only due to the coalition. It saw the end of the New Labour era with the removal of Gordon Brown. The Conservatives benefited from 4 years of modernisation under David Cameron. The Lib-Lab coalition lasted... The Lib-Con coalition lasted a full term, largely due to the 2010 Fixed Term Parliament Act, which was put in place, which was what the Liberals wanted. The Commons won a slender majority in 2015. Under policy and manifestos, both parties, Liberals and Conservatives, promised to reduce the deficit that came as a product of the 2007 to 2008 financial crisis. Cameron accused Labour of reckless overspending. 59% in a poll argued that it had been wasted. In terms of the election campaign, Conservatives had been targeting marginal seats since 2005 to establish their candidates as local members in that. And the Liberals got a boost where they did well in the polls following the 3 debates in which the leader looked extremely successful, Nick Clegg. In the wider context, Brown hadn't called an election following becoming a PM, which meant that he hadn't had time to secure his own mandate, so he was just kind of seen as a new government that wasn't really elected. It's kind of a convention to call an election when a new Prime Minister is put in place. And Brown was also treated harshly in the media, perceived as a workaholic without a vision for the country. And that is voting behaviour and the media. This is the Conservatives. This is politics. Component 1, Part 2, Core Political Ideas, Conservatism. Alright, let's start with differing views and tensions within conservatism. Alright, firstly you have traditional conservatism, which was set out in Edmund Burke's 1719 Reflections on the Revolution in France. It was a reaction to the French Revolution and the Enlightenment. The family, church and monarchy are tried and tested institutions of our society, and aristocratic leadership is justified in soft paternalism and the noblesse oblige, which is the noble's obligation to help other people, and it holds the idea of an organic society. The next idea within that is one nation conservatism, which is kind of the middle way, and it emerged in response to the development of laissez-faire capitalism by Benjamin Disraeli in his book Sybil, Sybil, and he said that capitalism encourages individualism. It wants imperialism, the maintenance of traditional institutions, reforms to improve the conditions of the working class, and Benjamin Disraeli made all of this known at Manchester and Crystal Palace in election campaigns in 1872. Neoconservatism is the third one I'll be talking about. It focuses on upholding social order and public morality. It promotes authoritarianism, and it's anti-permissive. It believes that society cannot be divided by outsiders or immorality. Neoliberalism is kind of similar to neoconservatism. It is based on Milton Friedman's and Friedrich Hayek's works, and it likes atomistic individualism, and it calls for minimal state, rejection of collectivism, and elimination of government intervention. It believes that the free market has to be protected against monopolies, inflation, and government intervention. So it's a bit more liberal than neoconservatism, and more social justicey. The New Right has been founded on the ideas of neoliberalism, joined up to neoconservatism, and it's linked to Keynesianism and welfarism. It's radical and holds traditional and reactionary elements. Reagan and Thatcher can be good examples of these, Reaganism and Thatcherism. That's the different views. Then we have core ideas and principles. The first core idea is pragmatism, which is the rejection, the rejection of theory for practical experience and tried and true methods, suggested by Edmund Burke and Michael Oakeshott. It is linked to traditional and one-nation conservatism, and only actions that change to conserve should be taken. That's a quote, change to conserve, which is why it favours minimal welfare. Libertarianism is another core idea, and it favours individual property. Paternalism is another core idea. Soft paternalism is when those who are recipients of the paternalism give their consent to it, and hard paternalism is where it is imposed regardless of consent, and it's a key one nation ideal. Paternalism is the idea of government by which people who are best equipped to lead by virtue of their birth, inheritance and upbringing do so, and they do so in favour of those who aren't equipped to lead. This ties into the core idea of organic society or state, in which hierarchy and authority must be maintained, and social cohesion builds all people together and prevents atomism, which is kind of an ideal of neoconservatism. So neoconservatism doesn't really like an organic society, it's quite individualistic. Tradition is the last core principle. Oh no, there's another one as well. Tradition says that the fundamentalist religious outlook has been weakened by the events of the Enlightenment. It acknowledges that, but it doesn't like it. It doesn't want change to the House of Lords. It believes that tradition provides society and the individual with a strong sense of identity. It believes that there are two modern secular arguments for tradition. The first being that tradition constitutes the accumulated wisdom of the past, which is a belief of Edmund Burke and G.K. Chesterton. And the second belief is that tradition provides society with the society and the individual with a strong sense of identity. So it's good in that sense. Another core idea of conservatism is human imperfection. It believes that law and order is needed because of this. Foreign policy has to be based on national security, and human behaviour is competitive, so any successful political system will recognise self-interest as more powerful than atomism. What? No, not atomism, altruism. Yeah, self-interest is more powerful than altruism, and it's just part of our human nature. Moving on to the thinkers, which is the final third of this part. First we have, I'll do it in order of old. First we have Thomas Hobbes, who wrote Leviathan in 1651, and he said people should live under a strong government, which is a traditional conservative view. And he also believes that humans are needy and vulnerable, and we're too easily led astray in our attempts to understand the world amongst us. Next oldest is Edmund Burke, who wrote Reflections on the Revolution in France in 1790. He's very traditional. He said, we should respect tradition respect tradition and empiricisms. Don't know that. I don't know what I wrote. He believed that change had to be taken with caution to maintain their delicate organic society. Yet he believed you have to make allowance for gradual and organic change. After him we have Ayn Rand. I think we should do before Oakeshott. Ayn Rand was a libertarian thinker, and she proclaimed herself to be radical for capitalism. That's a quote, radical for capitalism. She rejects government welfare, and she likes the NAP, the non-aggression principle, and she believes it's the only need. You don't really need a state. Fully. She says that people should pursue their own happiness as their highest moral aim. People should work hard to achieve a life of purpose and productiveness. And she wrote Atlas Shrugged in 1957 and The Fountainhead in 1943, both very important libertarian books, but more so Atlas Shrugged. Then we have Michael Oakeshott, who says that people should be guided by pragmatism rather than ideology. And his theories, and he believes that theories and ideologies oversimplify complex situations. Yeah, he thinks pragmatism is better than rationalism. And he wrote Rationalism in Politics in 1962 and On Human Conduct in 1975. Then lastly we have Robert Nozick, who is also a libertarian thinker. He liked basing a lot of his theories on Kant, Kantian ethics, that type of thing. He wrote Anarchy, State and Utopia, Anarchy, State and Utopia in 1974, and he, unlike Ayn Rand, he argued for a minimal night watchman state. He said that individuals in a society cannot be treated as a thing or used against their will as a resource, a Kantian idea, and individuals own their bodies, talents, and labour. Okay, fair enough. I don't know anyone who doesn't agree with that, so I don't know why he felt like saying it. That is all of the conservatives. This is Politics Component 1 Part... Oh no, this is Component 1 Part 2, Core Political Ideas, Liberalism. So we'll start with the core ideas and principles of liberalism. They believe in equality and social justice. They believe in a need for equality of opportunity, based on a belief of foundational equality, which usually results in a system of meritocracy. William Gladstone made changes to the civil services that made the civil service more of a meritocracy, rather than just full of like private school people. And Mary Wollstonecraft advocated women's rights through the use of a meritocracy. On the topic of social justice, John Rawls is in favour of social justice to prevent excessive inequality. The liberals believe in individualism, in that classicals believe in egotistical individualism, and more modern liberals believe in developmental individualism, which justifies state intervention. But both egotistical individualism and developmental individualism have implied tolerance of other people's belief and beliefs. There's the state, it is a necessary evil, is another principle. Liberals favour a Bill of Rights slash a constitution to promote rights, basic fundamental rights. They believe in this comes from Adam Smith. This comes from Adam Smith, The State is a Necessary Evil, and his ideas on capitalism. Both from this limited government and laissez-faire capitalism works its way into the other belief of freedom and liberty, which has links to utilitarianism in Bentham and Mill, but more Mill in this case, so more rule utilitarianism rather than act utilitarianism. Under freedom and liberty, John Locke said the end of law, as in the goal of law, is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. Rationalism is another key belief, and it is the belief in human reason. So they use war as a last resort, and strikes should be resolved without government intervention, and they have a faith in individual reasoning, unlike conservatives. They also believe in the idea of a liberal democracy, in which free elections are held to express the will of the people. There are limitations on the power of the state, and there's respect for civil liberties, and there's toleration of different views and different people. There's also the idea of a social contract between the people and the government, which it was written in John Locke's two treatises of government. Don't know how to say it. Treatise of government. It's more like eyes. Quick side note: Keynesianism is an economic system that requires government involvement to stimulate the economy to achieve full employment and pure stability. So that's the core ideas and principles of liberalism. These are the different views and tensions. Classical liberalism is associated with the rise of industrial capitalism, and believes in egotistical freedom slash individualism, which is negative freedom, so it's not positive, it's not about helping out other people. A belief in self-reliance, which they believe is better than the, quote, dependency culture. It was reinvented in the UK and the USA as neoliberalism, classical liberalism was, which later became the new right, and there was only a belief of welfare in cases where people really, really need it. Then you have modern liberalism, which says that an enabling state is the best thing to have, and that negative freedom is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So therefore, you need positive freedom, and people therefore need welfare to become free through equality of opportunity. They believe in national insurance, old age pensions, and historically have supported things like the Beveridge report, so Beveridge report, Beveridge. They want certain regulations within the markets, so aren't as free markety as classical liberalism. And both classical liberalism and modern liberalism favour the Human Rights Act and the Freedom of Information Act, and the mechanist theory of the state, in which the state is a machine that is created to serve and not restrict the people. Now we're moving on to the key thinkers. Let's start with John Locke. John Locke is an old philosopher. He said that society, state and government are based on a voluntary agreement or contract, social contract to be specific, and that government should be limited and based on consent from below, not up from the top. So it's more bottom up than it is top down. And he wrote two treatises of government. I'm going to keep messing that up. In 1690. Then you have Mary Wollstonecraft, who was kind of a feminist, and she said that women are rational, independent beings capable of reason. She also said that in order to be free, women should enjoy full civil liberties to pursue a career. She wrote a Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, and she stated that formal equality is needed in a society to promote liberalism. Then you have John Stuart Mill, utilitarian. The rule utilitarian, who said that individuals should be free to do anything except to harm others. So that's tying back into when we were talking about Ayn Rand and conservatism, talking about the NAP, non-aggression principle. He said that it's important to tolerate other ideas. He wrote On Liberty in 1859, and in On Liberty he established the harm principle, which was later developed by Ayn Rand into the non-aggression principle. Then we have John Rawls. There's three Johns as the key thinkers for liberalism: John Locke, John Stuart Mill, and John Rawls. And John Rawls is he died in 2002. He said that society must be first. Society must be just and guarantee each citizen with a life worth living. A fair society is one in which the difference of outcome is kept to a minimum. And he wrote A Theory of Justice in 1971. In my opinion, he's like the least notable. I think John Locke and John Stuart Mill are the best in terms of exam. Maybe Mary Wollstonecraft as well. Betty Friedan died in 2000. She was an Australian feminist, and she said that women are just as capable as men. Women deserve freedom from societal oppression, and that, quote, a girl should not expect special privileges because of her sex. In that they should have equality, but it shouldn't go past the line of equality. And she helped found the NOW, which is, I think, NOW. I don't know. I think it's a women's association. And that is liberalism in its entirety. This is Politics Component 1 Part 2, Core Political Ideas, and it is socialism. The core ideas and principles of socialism. Socialists believe in workers' control, which ties into Marxism and syndicalism. So through the state or implied consent, workers should have control of industry. They believe in collectivism, in that the interests of the majority should be met. Collectivism avoids wastefulness and limits impact of competitive individual effort, which is inherent and damaging to capitalist society and economies. And they believe in a sense of fraternity and brotherhood. They prefer a centralized state, which was a Marxist idea, in which there's the nationalization of key industries. Good example of this is 1945. Labour nationalised 20% of the economy. Socialist collectivism is another key principle of collectivism, in which they believe in industrial relations being maintained, housing being held up, education being held up, industry being held up, and healthcare being held up by the state through collectivism. Some people argue that collectivism can lead to less individual diversity and erosion of individual freedoms. Socialists believe in common humanity, so they believe in cooperation rather than competition, and they believe that humans are social creatures with a tendency for cooperation and rationality. They believe that equality is a defining subtext of socialism, in that social equality ensures fairness, social equality is a means of satisfying basic human needs, common ownership is beneficial for society. Social democrats only believe that inequality of opportunity, strangely enough, rather than equality of outcome. Oh no, not strangely, strongly. And whereas Marxists believe in equality of opportunity and outcome in the same respect. So that's absolute equality that Marxists believe in. They believe social class is a principle that socialism works off. And socialism, especially Marxism, is concerned with the states and treatment of the working class and the laziness of the upper and middle classes. Some case studies for socialism can be seen in the Russian Revolution, guild socialism in the UK, and syndicalism in France. Let's move on to differing views and tensions within socialism. So, the oldest, most classical form of socialism is revolutionary socialism, which has been adopted in Europe, Asia, and Africa after World War II. It's the revolutionary road to socialist society, and they believe that revolt against aristocracy and the bourgeoisie is the way to go, and it's based around teachings of Marx and Engels and its traditional communism. Then we move on to social democracy, which is a little bit more new, like kind of 40s era, post World War II, but not as extreme as revolutionary socialism, and it attempts to reconcile free market capitalism with state intervention. It is peaceful and constitutional. It has a wide push for social justice, and it's based around the revisionist theories of Edward Bernstein, a Jewish man who is kind of a key thinker, but not really. He's not really mentioned on the course. And it's evolutionary rather than evolutionary. So Labour 1945 is a good example of that. It's another example of Keynesianism economics. Yeah, and that's it. And then we have Third Way as another different view. It started in the 1980s, and it values community and moral responsibility with a strong sense of mutual dependence between people, which is why it favours communitarianism and liberal ideas over more traditional socialist ideas, such as personal autonomy, and at the same time having state community. Third Way socialists also believe in a competitional market state in which education is boosted to improve a person's job prospects, and from there boost the state's performance itself overall. They believe in social inclusion, in which there's a state meritocracy rather than defined hierarchy, like in capitalism, where it's based on the aristocracy or bourgeoisie. So Tony Blair made this clear in his policy where it said state welfare is a hand up, not a handout. Hand up, not a handout. They also believe in a social model based on consensus and harmony, and it sees no value in proposing radical revolutionary changes when people aren't vouching for these changes. They appreciate the primacy of the market over the state, and they accept globalism and have links to neoliberalism. Brilliant. Now we're moving on to the thinkers. Firstly, obviously we're going to have Marx and Engels. Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, they said social class is central to socialism. Human nature is socially determined and can only be expressed truly under communism. Class conflict is inevitable in capitalism. They wrote the Communist Manifesto. They created the idea of historic materialism. Their books saw a poignant period of dialect change. And a quote from them is, "The proletariat have nothing to lose but their chains." Beatrice Webb is the next thinker. She states the inevitability of gradualness, which is a quote, inevitability of gradualness, which is the establishment of socialism peacefully through democratic reform, so that's more evolutionary socialism. She says the expansion of the state will deliver socialism eventually, including the expansionism of the franchise to women and working class people. And a quote from her is, "Nature still obstinately refuses to cooperate by making the rich people innately superior to the poor people." The next thinker is Rosa Luxemburg, who says that evolutionary socialism is not possible as capitalism is based on economic exploitation, so it will never be fair. And she says the struggle by the proletariat creates class consciousness needed to overthrow the capitalist state. She wrote The Accumulation of Capital in 1913 and said that the capitalist market could not absorb all the surplus value generated by capitalism. So it's just wasteful. Anthony Crosland is the next key thinker, and he said, he vouched for state-managed capitalism, in which there's economic efficiency, a communitarian society, and social justice, aka what he called democratic equality. And a quote of his is, Marx has little or nothing to offer the contemporary socialist. Anthony Gibbons is the fifth and final key thinker of socialism. He's key thinker on the third way, and he rejects state intervention. And a quote from him is, "The new mixed economy looks for a synergy between public and private sectors." So he's in favour of the new economies and that. And that's the end of socialism. This is Politics Component 2, Part 1, UK Government. This is the Constitution of the UK Government. So firstly, the development, nature and sources of the UK Government. The UK Constitution, not the UK Government. The UK Constitution is uncodified, so it's not written down, unentrenched, which means it can be moved, it can be changed, and It's unitary, which means that things decided at Westminster affect the entirety of UK governance. These are the twin pillars of UK constitution. The first is parliamentary sovereignty. Parliament can change and make laws as it likes without being bound by its predecessors. And the rule of law. All people, including government and monarch, must follow the law and are bound by it. The 5 main sources of constitution are statute law, which is laws passed by Parliament; common law, which is laws made by judges in cases where law are unclear; conventions, which are traditions that are influential and written down in certain places that change the operation of the political system; authoritative works, which are not legally binding but written by experts describing how a political system is run; and then treaties, which are agreements with other countries, formal agreements. The 6 main sources of the Constitution, rather than main sources of Constitution, are the 1215 Magna Carta, which said that no one's above the law; the 1689 Bill of Rights, which created regular parliaments, free elections, freedom of speech in Parliament; the 1701 Act of Settlement, which established the right of Parliament to determine the time of succession to the throne; the 1707 Acts of Union even, in which Scotland and England were given the same in Parliament; the 1911 and 1949 Parliaments Act, the first being the Lords can't delay money bills, and they only get a 2-year delay on other bills; and then 1949 cut their delay powers by half, so they only get a 1-year temporary veto. And then the 6th source of the Constitution is the 1972 European Communities Act, which established the principle that EU law would take precedence over UK law in areas in which a conflict arose. Now we're moving on to how the Constitution has changed since 1997. There was House of Lords reform, and only 92 hereditary peers are allowed to be in the Lords now. From 2000, a House of Lords appointment commission nominated peers who were not linked with any party. There's been electoral reform. Various forms of proportional representation were introduced in Scottish Parliament, Welsh Assembly, Northern Irish Assembly, and the method of election for the European UK Parliament. There's been devolution, with referendums in 1997 and 1998 leading to devolved bodies being created for Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. A side note of this is they didn't answer the West Lothian question or the Barnett formula. The Human Rights Act was also put in place. This incorporated the European Convention on Human Rights from the 1950s into UK statute law in 1998, in which the government made the decision to derogate from Article 5 in cases of terrorism. So that Article 5 doesn't apply under Human Rights Act. The creation of the Supreme Court in 2005 and the 2005 Constitutional Reform Act led to the establishment, 4 years later in 2009, of the Supreme Court. And then these are the reforms under the 2010 to 2015 coalition. and the Conservative government after 2015. The coalition had plans for a reduction of amounts of MPs to 600 from 650, and elected Lord reforms, but nothing was done. In terms of electoral reform, on May 2011, a referendum was held for AV, alternative voting, in which 68% voted no. In terms of rights, the Conservative Party wanted to replace the Human Rights Act with a British Bill of Rights, but this didn't happen as well. The most significant changes were, in this period, were devolution, in which a Welsh referendum was held in 2011 that led to the establishment of the Welsh Assembly, receiving direct lawmaking power in 20 policy areas, an increase. And then Scotland, following the 2012 Scotland Act, gained more powers in borrowing, income tax, landfill tax, and stamp duty. So they had more control over there. In England, there was a solution proposed for the West Lothian question, which is English votes for English laws, applied in 2015. There was the Fixed Terms Parliament Act in 2011 meant that the PM could no longer choose the date of the general election. Obviously, if they were to propose a date for a general election, the other party would look weak if they didn't accept it, so it's not really done anything. Which is why the 2017 election took place. There were reforms in the Commons. Select committees, the chairs of select committees were chosen by MPs rather than party leaders, making it slightly more representative, actually a lot more representative, being honest. And the Backbench Business Committee was created. In 2015, the Recall of MPs Act was made, and this meant if an MP was given a custodial sentence or suspended from the House of Commons for 21 days, a by-election would be triggered if 10% of their constituents signed a recall petition. Okay, now we're moving on to the role and powers of devolved bodies in the UK. First we'll do England. English votes for English laws is first, and then we have the Greater London Council. We have Metro Mayors established to help create the Northern Powerhouse. There's little talk of an English Parliament, but it's highly unlikely to happen, because English people view Westminster Parliament as their parliament anyway. In Scotland, the 1998 Scotland Act gave primary powers and income tax varying powers by an additional or less 3p to the pound, so a plus or minus 3p to the pound. The 2012 Scotland Act increased tax varying powers to plus or minus 10p per the pound, and the devolution of some additional taxes, which is kind of why Scotland's a bit of a safe haven for tax right now. Slightly more, anyway. The 2016 Scotland Act extended powers in relationship to transport, energy, and social security benefit, and set income tax thresholds and rates, as well as allowing Scotland to receive the proceeds of a national VAT. In Wales, in the Welsh devolved body, the 1998 Wales Act gave secondary legislature powers to Wales. 2006 Wales Act provided for an additional referendum on primary legislative powers. Welsh devolution referendum in 2011 voted yes. They voted yes to the wealth, which gave direct lawmaking in 20 areas such as health and education. The 2014 Wales Act gave minor tax powers to Wales. In Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Act of 1998, based on the Belfast Agreement, created the Assembly and related institutions and gave the Assembly the right to legislate in transferred matters. The St Andrews Agreement in 2006 received further devolution and powers in 2007. The Corporation Tax Northern Ireland Act 2012 devolved power to set corporation tax in Northern Ireland. These arguments for further reforms. The first one being devolution in England. Arguments for yes. It would help solve the Barnett formula. It would answer considerably the West Lothian question. English votes for English laws make Scottish MPs second class at Westminster, and it has worked in other parts of the UK. It would be good for those in places like Cornwall who want more national representation. No. In the case of no, England's size and wealth means that it would dominate a federal structure. English votes for English laws may have already solved the West Lothian question. Most English people don't see a difference between the UK Parliament and the idea of an English Parliament. Defeat of Blair's proposals in 2004 suggests that there isn't enough of a sense of identity across the UK to make regional assemblies viable. Codified UK Constitution as the question. The arguments for yes, for having a codified constitution. It would educate the public about constitutional issues. It would reduce the damages of government pushing through ill-considered changes. A Bill of Rights entrenched would ensure a strong set of rights protection in the UK. There would be more clarity about the rights of institutions and the power of government. The Constitutional Court would be better. A Constitutional Court would better assess the actions of Parliament rather than Supreme Court, which is just based off a wide variety of century-old laws. In the case of no, codified constitution would be less responsive and adaptive than an uncodified one. Judges are not the best to regulate constitution as they are unelected and unrepresentative, and government power may be more effectively constrained by regular elections than by a constitutional document. That has been the Constitution, UK politics. This is component 2 of politics, part 1, UK government, the Parliament. Okay, so the structure and the role of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. First is the Commons. In the Commons, there's 650 constituencies, and it was going to be 600 in 2015, but that never happened. The Fixed Terms Parliament Act of 2011 meant that there were general elections held every 5 years at the end of the parliamentary term. Votes of no confidence in government or 2/3 of MPs wanting a general election can force one through, though. By-elections are held if an MP dies. By-elections are held if an MP dies or retires, and 3/4 of MPs are backbenchers. The main functions of Parliament are passing legislation, the House of Lords gets no say in the passing of money bills. A vast majority of legislation is put forwards by the executive, and party whips tell those in a party about how they should vote. The most important votes that are underlined 3 times, and this is called the 3-line whip. So when the MPs are given their pieces of paper telling like of the votes of the day or of the week or coming up, one's underlined 3 times. They basically need to attend. Persistent rebels can have the whip withdrawn, and smaller teams of whips operate in the House of Lords because it's more controversial removing the whip. Well, it means less because House of Lords representatives can't get voted out. Now we have parliamentary scrutiny. The ways in which parliamentary scrutiny happen. The first is questions to ministers, ministerial questions, which require oral or written answers. There are select committees, which shadow individual government departments in Commons and regulate them and hold them to account. There are debates, which are big stage pieces, which are used to gain influences, but the Lords' debates are more serious, but less influential, obviously. They provide ministers. Lords and Commons provide ministers. So the whips make recommendations to the PM for Commons and Lords who should be ministers, but even Lords can be ministers. They represent the electorate, which can only be said for the House of Commons. They do not have to vote with the opinion of their constituency all the time. Most MPs are white and male. It's argued that this group is overrepresented in Parliament. One concern of MPs voting is that they will be too focused on growing popularity in their party to care about what the electorate think. But in reality, a good MP can juggle that in any case. Only 29% of MPs in 2015 were female, but this, to be honest, is probably just a product of first past the post. Then we have the comparative powers of the House of Commons and House of Lords. So the exclusive powers of the Commons are money bills, as they're taxpayers. The Chancellor of the Exchequer always has to be in the Commons as a product of this. The Commons can exercise power in confidence supply, quote-unquote, such as in the 2010 Lib-Con coalition. Main powers of the Lords can be seen in its being a second chamber. The Parliament Act restricts the suspension even, to only 1 year, but regardless, a 1-year blockage is still pretty impressive and important. The Salisbury Convention of 1945 means that Lords could not oppose a bill if it's been put in a manifesto that was voted for by the majority. That's a key point. And it acts as a revising chamber. They go over proposed changes. They can veto non-financial bills for 1 year. Obviously, I've mentioned that. And Lords can force government to hold an election if Parliament goes beyond 5 years. But reality, means that will never happen. Debates over the relative powers of House of Commons, if of the House of Commons is more effective or the Lords is more effective. So the Commons is more effective. The arguments for that are the Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1945 mean that the Lords have less and less power. There's the Salisbury Convention, so the Lords can't vote against, manifesto policies. The legitimacy and representation of constituents is a key point. It's a one-up that the Commons has on the Lords. They have the liaison committee. They have a wide variety of other committees. They have scrutiny. They have the influence of the media. They changed the voting system for the European Parliament elections in the 1990s. And they equalised the age of consent for gay and heterosexual people, along with banning hunting with dogs. All these 3 acts, without the consent of the Lords. They just pushed it through. The argument that the Lords is more effective is much more limited, saying that the party discipline is weaker, so the Lords it's more of an individual say, which is a bit more fair maybe, less, hive-mindy. They still have scrutiny, true, and they can affect legislation, and they have expertise in particular roles. Alright, the third point, legislative process. These are the stages of a bill. Firstly, it will enter the Commons, and a first reading will be held where the bill is introduced. The second reading and a vote is held, where there's a full debate and a vote. And then there's the committee stage, where it's scrutinised by the Public Bill Committee, and changes are proposed and voted on. And then there's the report stage and the third reading, where there's amendments and debate and vote on final form of the bill. Then it goes into the Lords for the first reading. They have a second reading and then a vote and a committee stage in the Lords. And then there's a report stage and a third reading. If they accept it in its current Commons form, it will go straight down, and the monarch, it will achieve royal assent, and the bill will be signed by the monarch. If it's not, it will go back to the House of Commons with changes proposed, at which point, if the House of Commons accept these changes, it will become a law. If the changes are rejected by the House of Commons, it will go back into the House of Lords, and it will keep on going around in parliamentary ping-pong. And if the House of Lords accept at that time, with that revision, then it will achieve royal assent. That's basically it. And then the ways in which Parliament interact with the executive is the last quarter of this topic. There's backbenchers. The opposition, select committees, and ministerial and PMQs. So backbenchers have parliamentary privilege to say whatever they like in Parliament. Backbench Business Committee created in 2010 allowed the Backbench Business Committee. In 2010, following the creation of the Backbench Business Committee, they were allowed 35 days a year to propose topics to be debated on. The usage of urgent questions and most recently allowed through a high level by if you put forward an urgent question, the speaker can accept it, and John Bercow, the previous speaker, was very open in letting people ask their urgent questions. So he held backbenchers' rights quite close to his heart. Then there's opposition, who also have the parliamentary privilege to say as they like. They got the backbench business committee as well. They're given short money in resources and money to run a fair election campaign against the executive and the government. They have 20 days a year to propose subjects to debate, so a little bit less than the rest of the backbench. And then the select committees is the third. The Public Accounts Committee examines government expenditure, seeking to ensure value for money is being obtained. The Liaison Committee chairs all of the select committee's questions and questions the PM twice a year. Or whatever. The Liaison Committee questions the PM twice a year on government policy and chairs all of the select committees. So it's all the committees kind of wrapped into one. And the Committee on Standards overseeing the work of the Parliamentary Commission on... The Committee on Standards overseeing the work of Parliamentary Commission on Standards, is officially in charge of MPs' conduct, including financial affairs, so what they spend their money on. And then the third and final point is in terms of the ways that Parliament interacts with the executives is through ministerial and PMQs. So ministerial questions and Prime Minister's questions. PMQs are held once a week each Wednesday, obviously not anymore, and helps the public see into Parliament with media sound bites, etc. Whereas Minister's questions are arguably better as they are more serious. And that is the end of Parliament. This is Politics Component 2, Part 1 UK Government, Prime Minister and the Executive. So this first we'll do the structure, the role and the powers of the Executive. The structure is the Prime Minister, the head of the Executive, chairs the Cabinet, appoints the Cabinet and the junior ministers. The Cabinet, going into the Cabinet, so that's either 20 or 23 senior members around that level. The Government Department, so the Ministry of, which is each chaired by a senior member from the Cabinet. And further away from that is the executive agencies, which are semi-independent bodies that carry out the function of government departments, so that's kind of civil service. Moving away from structure, we have the main roles of the executive. These are to propose legislation, propose the budget, make policy decisions. The main powers of the executive, which are royal prerogative powers, initiation of legislation, and secondary legislation. And then we have ministerial responsibility. Although individual responsibility is put in the ministerial code, in short, that is the case. It just is. There's no although. The ministerial code issued by each PM to their ministers. The fate of the individual minister depends on how serious the issue is perceived, the level of criticism in Parliament, the attitude of the PM that day, the collective ministerial responsibility, collective ministerial responsibility is the convention that ministers must support all decisions of the government and the public. So if they don't do that, they can be fired. And the expectations within coalition governments, because it's different within coalition governments. The PM and the Cabinet is another, going into further detail of it. The power of the PM and the Cabinet. So the factors governing the Prime Minister's selection of ministers range from the importance of including individuals with ability and experience, establishing the Prime Minister's authority, rewarding loyalty and including key allies, but also consolidating potential rivals, maintaining a balance between different factions within the governing party, and meeting expectations of diversity. And there's also, still within the topic of the PM and the Cabinet, these are the factors that affect the relationship of the PM and the executive. They are the management skills of the PM's abilities to set the agenda, the use of the Cabinet committees and informed groups to make decisions, the development of the PM's office and Cabinet office, the impact of the wider political and economic situation. Then here's the argument that the Cabinet remains important today, as opposed to the government is dominant in government. The Cabinet approves government decisions. On important issues, the PM recognises the need for government support. The Cabinet is where the programme of government business in Parliament is discussed. The UK doesn't have a presidential system in reality, even if it shows some of these features. The fall of Thatcher shows that the importance of keeping the support of your Cabinet. On the other hand, saying that the PM is the most powerful and dominant force in government, you could say that all decisions in government are have to be put forward by the PM. The PM controls the agenda and the length of the Cabinet meetings. In practice, disputes are normally and usually resolved outside of the Cabinet, in committees, or by intervention of the Prime Minister himself. The media focuses heavily on the PM, partly as modern PMs tend to project themselves as national leaders rather than government leaders. So, in that sense, the PM is the most dominant power in government. Okay, so now we'll move on to the powers of the PM and Cabinet to dictate events and policy. The PM's powers include appointing, reshuffling, and dismissal of government ministers, providing national leadership and representing the UK in international affairs, direction of government policy with a special responsibility for economic and foreign policy, and for decisions to use military force. The management of the Cabinet, including chairing meetings, controlling the agenda, and summing up its conclusions from the meetings. The leadership of the largest party in the House of Commons. The responsibility of the overall shape and structure of government, including the number and functions of government departments. So now we're moving on to the factors which may enhance or restrict the PM's powers. The extent to which the governing party and Cabinet are united can affect this. The popularity of the PM and the size of the governing party majority affect this. The personality and leadership style of the PM affect this. And the last factor which may enhance or restrict the PM's powers is the impact of external pressures such as the state of the economy or a wide variety of crises and foreign affairs. And that is the end of the PM and the executive topic. This is component 2, component 2, part 1, UK government politics, relations between institutions. Alright. The Supreme Court and legislature and policy making processes. The Supreme Court began in 2009 after the 2005 Constitutional Reform Act. it has four roles. It acts as the final court of appeal over the UK. It hears public appeals around arguable points in the law. It hears appeal from UK civil cases, and it hears appeals from UK criminal cases. It consists of 12 members, but cases are heard by an odd number to reach a majority verdict. The most senior judge is designated as the President of the Supreme Court. They retire at either 70 or 75, depending on whether they became a judge before or after 1995. They try and maintain judicial neutrality, which is the principle that judges should not be influenced by their own political bias. They should also try and maintain judicial independence, which is the principle that judges shouldn't be influenced by other branches of the executive or government. In terms of judicial neutrality and maintaining that, they are able to do it by avoiding political activity, and they go through a process of lengthy legal training. But on the other hand, they are encouraged to uphold the status quo. And there's been growing judicial activism within the Supreme Court and courts on the whole. In terms of, which undermines judicial neutrality, in terms of judicial independence, the Human Rights Act and the appointment of the judges themselves is very fair, because it's done through committees. In terms of, on the other hand, you could say that the government retains some role in the appointment, and that ministers ministers can something rulings. I can't read my own handwriting. Is the Supreme Court influential? Yes. 1. They can issue a judicial review on the actions of ministers and other government officials. 2. Their position on the final Court of Appeal gives them a lot of say in significant matters, such as Article 50. 3. Since the Human Rights Act, the Supreme Court has gained much more power and say in matters concerning the public's human rights. In terms of whether or not they're influential, 1, there are no higher constitutional laws, so the Supreme Court cannot strike down statute laws. So they have to go with the statute laws implied by the status quo and the executive and prior governments. 2, it has to wait for cases to be brought to it. It can't find cases and hear about something and then immediately go to it. Something has to be brought to it. 3, it cannot overturn statutes even if they go against the European Convention on Human Rights, established in the Human Rights Act, into UK statute law. In terms of, that's the first quarter. The next quarter is the relationship between the executive and parliament. One argument is that there is an elective dictatorship in the UK. In 2011, the coalition government, which hadn't been elected, people voted for a party, not a coalition, pushed through the Fixed Terms Parliament Act. In 2003, in the Blair government, there was attempts to abolish the post of Lord Governor without any prior consultation. Arguments, and those are two good examples. arguments that the government control over Parliament has been reduced is that the last decade has seen an increase of rebellions in the Commons. 2, fixed terms Parliament Act has reduced PM's ability to choose the time of an election. 3, the Backbench Business Committee, established in 2010, gives the backbench much more say on the topics for debate. 4, MPs can now elect the chairs of select committees, which have grown in power and status as a product of this. And 5, the Lords are becoming increasingly assertive about enforcing regulation. And on the other hand, for the argument that government still retains a large degree of control over Parliament, elective dictatorship, etc., etc. Number 1, the power of the whips remains important tools of government through prime ministerial patronage. Number 2, the government still retains the power to induce secondary legislation. Number 3, government controls the vast majority of the legislative schedule. Only a couple of days are given to the main opposition and the backbench business committee. 35 days for backbench business committee, and then 20 days for the collective opposition, with 11 days for the main opposition. That's debates anyway. Ministers can still number 4. Ministers can still abstain select committees from summoning officials to their hearings. And number 5, the House of Lords usually defers to the will of the Commons after a period of parliamentary ping-pong, regardless of whatever's happened before. Okay, now we're moving on to the aims, roles and impact of the EU on the UK government. The 4 freedoms that the UK, of the EU that underpin the single market are free movement of workers, free movement of goods, free movement of capital, and free movement of services. What is the impact of the EU on, number 1, policy? Membership of single market has utilised the UK's international trade policies. Oh, no. Cut that. Number 1, policy. The membership of the single market has restricted the UK's international trade policies, such as the immigration policy, due to free movement, has been altered, and the agriculture and fishing policy, such as the common fisheries policy, which has allowed Germans to fish in British waters, which has upset a lot of fishermen. Number 2, rights. There's been an increase in workers' rights, an established paternal leave for men who are married and they have their partner has a baby, and so they can go and look after the baby. And then also a minimum wage has been established through the EU. Although arguably, I think that was in Tony Blair's manifesto anyway. Number 3, devolution. Most devolved areas are areas that are agricultural and so are often affected by EU policy decisions. Number 2, Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU. That's a little bit of added information, that although because of it's not really the way it's been affected, it's just the way that leaving the EU has affected it. So the EU's preferred in more it's wanted more in agricultural areas, but like further from England, because England and Wales. Okay, number 4, parties. 1. I'll do A and B from now on. A. Conservative Party has been split over the EU for decades. B. UKIP gained a majority of seats in the EU election. Following this, the Brexit Party gained the majority of seats in the EU election. C. Labour and the Brexit referendum quietly split the party, but in a big noticeable way. D. In terms of Liberal Democrats, they arguably lost votes in the 2017 election and 2019 election due to their overtly pro-EU stance. Number 5, sovereignty. 5, sovereignty. A. EU law took precedence over the UK law, as shown in the factor tame ruling. And B. The greater use of a qualified majority. The greater use of qualified majority voting instead of a national veto has arguably also reduced UK sovereignty and parliamentary sovereignty. 6. Public opinion. A. The UK press helps enhance Euroscepticism, and Euroscepticism is a large part of British culture by this stage, especially English culture, with the UK having a non-full relationship with the EU. For example, they opted out of Article 5 of the ECHR, which means that they can reduce sovereign rights in cases of terrorism. Okay, and now we're moving on to the location of sovereignty in the UK political system. What is legal sovereignty? That is the right to ultimate legal authority in a political system, which is held by Parliament. What is political sovereignty? The ultimate political power. Arguably, this is held in the electorate, the people who vote. There's arguments for and against Parliament having the most sovereignty. 4. 1. Parliament remains the ultimate legal authority in the UK. 2. Parliament retains the right to abolish and dissolve any form of devolved government. 3. Judges may recommend laws for amendment that don't conform to the HRA, but this doesn't have to be acted on. I don't know, I forgot whether or not I was using a numbering system or like a letter system. So the next point is Parliament is allowed to repeal the 1972 European Committees Act at any given time to regain full legal authority. Arguments in the case that Parliament doesn't have the most sovereignty. 1. Parliament derives its legal authority from the political authority of the people. 2. The steadily growing power of the executive means that Parliament, to a large extent, is controlled by the government. 3. Legal sovereignty is a theoretical concept, and there are constraints on what Parliament can do. For example, it cannot recall the Scottish government, as the Scottish people would just carry on holding a Scottish government. And if all the Scottish people are holding a Scottish government, it doesn't matter what people think or what's written on paper, there's still a Scottish government. People are still paying the taxes that the Scottish government want to pay. And 4, globalization makes sovereignty a less meaningful concept. And that's the end of relationships between institutions. This is the politics component 2, part 2, non-core political ideas, feminism, voice memo. Okay, let's start with types of feminism. Let's start. There's a lot of types. Let's start with liberal feminism. They believe that women need legal and political equality to give them the freedom that they need to become autonomous individuals in society. Betty Friedan is one such. a woman. She said, "We can no longer ignore the voice within women that says, 'I want something more than my husband and my children and my home.'" Socialist feminism is the ideology that believes that women are treated as a reserve army of labour within capitalism, to be used in the workforce when needed, but are generally oppressed by being kept in the domestic sphere to care for their husbands and reproduce the labour force. Sheila Rowbotham and Charlotte Perkins Gilman are both of these, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman said, "The labour of women in the house enables men to produce more wealth than they otherwise could, semicolon, and in this way, women are economic factors in society, full stop, but so are horses." Yeah, end quote. And then we have radical feminism. They believe that the personal is political because patriarchy persuades every aspect of life. They also believe a sexual revolution and a fundamental change to the structure of society is needed to eradicate the patriarch. Some of these types of feminists advocate full female lesbianism. Naomi Wolf is a radical feminist, and she said, "The qualities that a given period calls beautiful in a woman are merely the symbols of the female behaviour. That is the period." I'll start that again. "The qualities that a given period calls beautiful in woman are merely the symbols of the female behaviour that the period considers desirable. The beauty myth is always actually prescribing behaviour and not appearance. Full stop." That's taken from her book, The Beauty Myth, which is highly influential. Postmodern feminism is like the fourth big one, which is quote unquote a type of looser intersectionality. Basically, and we'll get into that in a minute. Both Richards and Bain Gardner worked on this, and Bain Gardner wrote, I think with Richards, that they did it together. "Our goal is to help young women build a foundation of feminism in their own lives. Sometimes this requires assuring them that their theory is not an issue, that feminism isn't all about the choice you make, but the freedom to make that choice." Okay, and now we're going to look into the closer subdivisions of feminism. So we have equality feminism, which believes that biological differences are irrelevant, and that men and women should be absolutely equal. So Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the socialist feminist, believes that. Difference feminism states that men and women are different, but female qualities should be celebrated. And Carol Gilligan believes this. She says that, "I find the question of whether gender differences are biologically determined or socially constructed to be deeply disturbing." Then we have cultural feminism, which is a part of difference feminism, that says that women's cultural values such as compassion and pacifism are superior to men's, aggression and that. And that's a quote. And that society should be reordered according to this, so that there should kind of be almost the establishment of a slight matriarchy even. Then we have lesbian separatism, which is like says that heterosexual relationships are based on power and thereby restrictive. Charlotte Bunch and Kate Millett believe this, and Bunch says, "Our very strengths as lesbians lies in the fact that we are outside of patriarchy, semicolon, our existence challenges its life. Then we have intersectionality, which argues that there are a wide variety of circumstances that women can find themselves oppressed within, and bell hooks, both lowercase, is the key, sort of came up with this, or she popularized it, and she said that women do not need to eradicate difference to feel solidarity. We do not need to share common oppression to fight equally and to end oppression. So basically, different people have different levels of oppression, is what she's saying. And it's not just all about white middle class Americans. Okay, then these are the different feminist thinkers. The main five. There's Simone de Beauvoir, who's second wave and existentialist. In terms of human nature, she's got a liberal idea, and she says that gender differences are created by men in society, they are not natural. In terms of the state, she argues it reinforces a culture that prevents women from expressing their true freedom and identity. Once again, a liberal idea. In terms of society, she says, in line with her existentialist view, that social constraints prevent individuals, not just women, from attaining self-realization and true freedom, another liberal ideal. And then in terms of the economy, she says that men's domination of economic life restricts the life choices open to women, which can arguably be said to be a socialist view. Then we have Bell Hooks, who came up with intersectionality. She's also an equality feminist. In terms of human nature, she says, women, like men, have multiple identities and therefore experience a wide variety of forms of oppression, which is both a current view and a liberal view. In terms of the state, she says that the state is dominated by white men, which therefore reinforces and reflects their position within society, which is a current view. On society, she says that society is full of complex relationships. To solve social conflict, love between all minority cultures must be established, which is another concurrent view. In terms of the economy, she says that the liberation of the poor is a social issue, as well as an economic one, which is almost a socialist issue, but not strictly one. Then we have Sheila Rowbotham, who's strictly a socialist, and then she's also another equality feminist, whereas Simone de Beauvoir would be a difference feminist, like Kate Melissett. And on human nature, she says that women's consciousness of the world is created by men. And on terms of the state, she says that the state is the servant of capitalism, a very clear socialist view. In terms of the society, she says the nature of society is economically determined, and that society reflects the dominant position of both capitalism and men in general, another socialist view. And then on top of that, in terms of the economy, obviously it's going to be a socialist view. She has a Marxist perspective, and her quote is, women are a low-paid reserve army of labour, ... Close quote. Then we have Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who's a socialist and an equality feminist. In terms of human nature, she says biological differences are irrelevant. Women can compete equally with men, a equality feminist view. She has no distinctive views on the state. In terms of the society, she says society has always assigned inferior roles to women. In modern society, this has no justification, so there's no need for it. And then on the economy, she says that the domestic servitude of woman to woman allowed men to dominate the world, which is almost a socialist view. Then we have Kate Millicent, who's second wave, lesbian separatist, and then also different feminist. On human nature, she says that women are capable of freeing themselves through lesbian relationships, which is both radical, liberal, difference, and maybe even current, depending on how you look at it. In terms of the state, she says that the state is merely an agent of the patriarchy. It is part of the problem, but not the solution, which is a liberal view. In terms of society, she says that modern society is completely characterized by patriarchy, which infests both private and public spheres. And in terms of the economy, she says that she calls herself a quasi-socialist, but regardless, this isn't fundamental to her feminism, so she doesn't really mention the economy in her feminism, and that is feminist thinkers and the different types of feminism for the course.